Let's talk about the BBC. Uh, they've been making a lot of noise at the BBC saying we're sorting out our gender pay gap problems. Now, today, the equality watchdog, the Equality and Human Rights Commission, decided that the BBC, although it had admitted some discrepancies in what it paid men and women in the past, that it was not in any way guilty of any kind of illegal bias against women. Now, the women today of the BBC have protested in no uncertain terms. They've called this Human Rights Commission verdict a whitewash, and they say that the BBC still does have a major problem with the gender pay gap, and the fact that basically that the BBC remains a sort of white middle class public school Oxbridge educated boys club. It always was that. I think it's been cleaning up its act a little bit over the last few years, but the aroma of inequality persists at the BBC, to say the least. So let's now talk to the Director of Communications at the IEA, Annabel Denham. Hello, Annabel.
Hi, Kevin.
Your thoughts? The ladies, the women at the BBC are less than happy with this verdict from the the Equality and Human Rights Commission. And if you step into the BBC, I mean, this isn't necessarily a reflection of what people get paid, but if you step into the BBC, you could easily get the impression it's still very much a sort of blokes club.
Yeah, so I mean, I think I'm going to slightly disagree with you here, Kevin. I mean, I appreciate that it would be a deliciously juicy story to uncover discrimination at that determinedly woke institution, the BBC, but alas, I don't think that's what's at play here. I don't think that there's some conspiracy whereby Auntie is in cahoots with the Equalities and Human Rights Commission and is attempting to mask or to squash the fight against unequal pay. I think what we're seeing is what we saw the 2 years that the gender pay gap reporting was published. It's this kind of broad picture of pay inequality that actually fails to look at the specifics, but that is pushed into the public domain. And then you have a fourth wave feminists getting very up in arms about it and painting this kind of victimhood narrative that doesn't really exist. I mean, ultimately, turning our attention to the world of TV and radio, it rests on the valuation of talent. You've got two people who are doing the same show who might get very different treatment, and that could be due to any number of things. It could be to do with their agent, it could be to do with the number of Twitter followers that they might have, it could be their presenting style. And ultimately, what we don't want is for the state to step in and start to tell managers, they're the ones who are on the ground, they're the ones who are making these decisions intimately kind of connected to it and would have the best judgment of the best discretion of who might be the best person for the job and what that person should be paid. We don't really want to kind of have the state stepping in and telling them, you know, how much people should be paid. But as I said, what this has done is it's given oxygen to the gender pay gap lobby. Well, it's these women who are just determined to see other women as victims. And as I said earlier, every year companies of over 250 employees are now forced to publish their pay data. But because this data doesn't take into account key differentials like job or age or background or experience, even whether an employee is part or full time, all you get is this meaningless data that's thrown into the public domain to much fanfare, to much fury, even though it isn't comparing like with like. And yet this is still mandatory for companies over 250 employees to do, although it was suspended in 2020 because they realised it was such a burden on companies, and that was the last thing they wanted during the coronavirus crisis.
Why do you think that the former BBC presenter Carrie Gracie, who led the charge on the gender pay gap row at the BBC, has branded the EHRC verdict, and I quote, a whitewash?
Well, I think that, as I say, there is just this determination to see women as victims, this fourth wave feminist movement that is determined to portray women as being discriminated against. I mean, let's not forget that the Equal Pay Act that was introduced in 1970 makes it illegal for companies to discriminate on the basis of race or gender. So that simply isn't what we're seeing here, because if it were, there would be very, very serious consequences. I mean, companies are simply not allowed to do this. So,
Yeah, but can I just interrupt for a second, Annabel? Because
yeah.
the thing is that the BBC did accept that it had this terrible discrepancy, and that's why hundreds of women at the BBC were suddenly given pay increases and settlements to even up the salaries of the men and the women at the BBC. So they intrinsically accepted they had a big problem. In fact, Zoe Ball, in order to stick her at the top of the earning tree altogether, was given a £1 million pay rise to make sure that she earns more than Gary Lineker, even though she lost about 1 million listeners from her Radio 2 show. So the BBC is implicitly accepting that it had this problem, otherwise it wouldn't have given all these women pay rises. So surely that means it should really be guilty of illegal bias against women before they did that.
But what I would probably see it as is this implicit concession to the gender pay gap lobby, which is extremely powerful. I mean, look at the media furore every time the gender pay gap reporting data comes out. That's in April of every year. Look at what's happening this week. You know, the media, they're adding fuel to the fire and placing immense pressure on the BBC to offer these women settlements or to drastically increase their pay. So to a degree, it's just good PR for the BBC. If they want to keep people watching, if they want to have women watching their TV shows, they want to keep their viewing figures up, then it's good PR to respond to these allegations by increasing female pay. Now, one thing I would say that hopefully would go down quite well with your listeners is that historically the worst employers for actual discrimination against women are the large monopolistic employers. So they are now often unionized. So really kind of classic example is the immortalized Ford in Dagenham. And the BBC is such an employer. I mean, if women are poorly treated, then the best remedy is actually competition. Lack of competition is what leads to fewer opportunities. It leads to management being sloppy and not following good practices. And the BBC is just such an organisation, a quasi-monopoly. So if it had to earn its money in the workplace, if we had a subscriber model for the BBC, if we had the drastic reform that is so desperately needed, then it wouldn't be able to, overpay its men, if indeed that is what is happening.
Now, I know there's a lot of people who work at the BBC, but there were 1,000 complaints from the women of the BBC to say that they were doing similar jobs to men and getting less money. So it does seem a rather pressing issue there. I mean, and I know the BBC, in fairness, has tried to raise its game and to sort this problem out rather kind of ostentatiously, to be honest with you. They're rather overcompensated, I think, sometimes, particularly with Zoe Ball. Zoe Ball apparently is rather embarrassed she was giving £1 million pay rise just so the BBC can say our highest paid employee is a woman. Hooray! But why, oh why, is the new Director General, after years and years and years of public school educated Oxbridge white middle class male Director Generals? Surely this time they could have got a different kind of Director General. I don't know, call me controversial, maybe a woman. But no, we got another white middle class public school educated Oxbridge person. When are they going to give that important job to a woman?
Well, I mean, I believe in a meritocracy, Kevin, so I don't have a preference of the gender of the person or the race of the person at the top of the BBC. I hope that they are choosing the person who would be best equipped to take on that job. And it's a very difficult job. I mean, look at the pressure that the BBC is now under to we've also decriminalise the licence fee. It's under tremendous pressure to reform. It's under tremendous pressure from video streaming services. This is not a particularly easy job that Tim Davie is walking into. And I mean, I would just say that I certainly don't want to live in a world where women are, given jobs simply on account of their gender. In fact, I think to do so would be to pay women a terrible disservice. Imagine being a woman and climbing the greasy corporate pole and reaching your way to the top and being CEO, and people suggesting that the only reason you're there is on account of your gender. I mean, it would completely delegitimize any of your achievements. So I mean, all I would say is that I hope the BBC have chosen the right person for the job, and I hope that the BBC gets the root branch reform that it needs and transitions to a subscriber-owned mutual.
Yeah, I should put on the record, I'm with you all the way. I believe in a meritocracy as well, and it shouldn't choose particularly important jobs just on the basis of box ticking. But the BBC is so keen and anxious to project an image of wokeness and wonderfulness and equality, and peace, harmony and love, that it deserves to be put under the microscope on this kind of issue. And, it has admitted itself that it has in the past, on a rather serial basis, paid women less than men for doing the same jobs. It does deserve to be seriously criticised for that, given its stance as woke central.
I mean, yes. So like I said at the start, I do think it's very determined to be woke, and that's why I can't imagine that discrimination is at play within the BBC. And I mean, I have to say that I can't get too excited, or rather too upset by this story, because what we're basically talking about are extremely well-paid female presenters complaining that they're not being paid more. I mean, I haven't seen many of these women come out and say, that the cleaners at the BBC buildings ought to be paying more, the people who collect their mugs ought to be paid more. This is about women who are very, very high up, getting up in arms and making a very public fuss about the fact that they're not being paid as much as their male counterparts, even though perhaps, it's at the discretion of the employer. Perhaps one thing that people don't really talk about, they just simply didn't ask for it. I mean, how many examples do we have of women who haven't asked for pay rises when men have? Men have been willing to go into their boss's office and threaten to leave if they don't get paid more money. And women are not always seizing those opportunities, but it's not really acceptable for them to then complain when they're not being paid as much. So I think ultimately there are many factors at play. I wouldn't want the heavy hand of the state coming in and starting to tell companies or even the BBC how much people should be paid, because it should be at the discretion of managers. I don't want managers to start being HR professionals. I want them to be on the ground and determining who should be paid what, based on their talents. Or
with you on all that, Annabel. We're not at loggerheads here. I'm just pursuing a story, but let me ask you this. What I think the BBC has kind of maybe deliberately done is obfuscated this entire issue of pay. They think that the public, the general licence fee payers, we're all going around going, oh, blimey, it's terrible about the BBC. Have you seen the gender pay gap? No, that's not what we're going around worrying about. We're going around worrying about why you pay, £2 million for a bloke to go, and here's Wolves versus Liverpool, the presenter of Match of the Day. We're worried about why the public broadcaster that we pay for is paying a woman nearly £2 million to be a DJ on a breakfast TV show. Breakfast radio show. It's the sheer scale of the money that our state broadcaster pays what it calls the talent, and the talent is anyone who's got a microphone in front of their face. That is something that the BBC ought to recalibrate with a sense of urgency. Wouldn't you agree?
I mean, yes, there are many, many issues at the BBC, and in my view, it needs to be salami sliced. It needs to be moved to a subscriber model, just like the video streaming services are. It's massively diversified. It needs to focus on one or two things. What are its most popular radio shows? What are its most popular TV shows? Focus on that and start to force ask the people who actually want those services to pay for it. I mean, ultimately what we have is a public service broadcasting tax. People are forced to pay the license fee whether or not they watch BBC shows, whether or not they watch BBC News, whether or not they listen to BBC radio shows. And that's the ultimate problem that we have here. When they move to a subscriber-owned model, when they're forced to think like an ordinary business and try to establish what it is the consumers want and consumers will pay for, then they can start to choose how they spend those funds, who they want their talent to be, and how that talent is going to attract as many viewers or as many listeners as possible. But at the moment, there is no accountability. There's no incentive for them to think in a more business minded bottom line way, because there's a tax. People have to pay for it whether they use the services or not.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Annabel, fascinating talking to you. Thank you so much for your time. That's Annabel Denham there. She's the Director of Communications at the Institute of Economic Affairs. I asked her, is the BBC institutionally sexist? I think no was her answer, but you may have other ideas.